Alrighty, so I got another deck guide for you. This time we're going with Mono Green Palpatine, deck that I've been working on, deck that has succeeded somewhat in some events. So it's definitely something that's competitive. It does have some bad matchups. We'll definitely talk about that. Hint, it's Sabine, but it's also got some good matchups and it's fun to play. And yeah, we're going to do a deep dive. I'm going to go through general premises, break down every card in the deck, talk about some strategy, talk about some sideboarding, and yeah, let's get to it. So first off, why would we play Palpatine in general? So this is the biggest leader in the game. It's the only 8 cost to deploy in the game. He's got one of the most massively impactful leader flip abilities possible. Steals a unit. His leader ability before he flips is a card draw engine. So there's a lot to like there, right? There's stuff not to like. He costs 8. It's basically useless a lot of times into hard aggro. And yeah, so the premise here when we play Palpatine is we want to be the biggest deck. We want to be bigger than whatever our opponent is doing and present a situation where if they can't kill us quickly enough, we should win because our leader is more massive than theirs, creates better card advantage, and steals their best unit, right? So that's why we play Palpatine. Why would we play Mono Green now? So Mono Green definitely limits you in the card pool. Palpatine in general lends itself to wanting to play a later game, so often you would think, well, blue would be a good pair. Blue has the best removal, also has a bunch of life gain. And I think blue Palpatine is certainly also a consideration. But Mono Green, what it does is it lets you ramp more, right? Command gives you another card that adds the super laser tech and resupply to let you ramp. The more you ramp, the quicker you can get to Palpatine's endgame. And his flip can help stabilize you earlier in the game if you ramp quickly to him. Command in general is also like just a pretty good card. Like it's great at grinding because of its recursion. It does give Mono Green a little more access to some removal. Now the removal is limiting because it doesn't hit unique units. I think it's a major issue with Command, the card in general, but often it can hit something. And a lot of times it's like space units. There aren't that many unique space units. So more often than not, like we're talking like A-wings, right? X-wings, things like that, like early game space units that Command can help stabilize against. But of course, there are unique space units, there are unique ground units. It can never help you kill leaders. So the removal part of it is sometimes tricky. The experience part of it is also really good because, you know, the deck is going to play a lot of Sentinels. The deck also plays cards like Overwhelming Barrage. So having buffed up units to then be able to spread out even more damage is really nice. The other Mono Green card in this deck is Enterprising Lackeys, which I think is fantastic, right? 4 cost, 5/5. What's not to like? That is absolutely massive. It's also kind of infinite, right? It never goes away, which is really nice. You don't ever run out of like a beefy unit to play once you play an Enterprising Lackey because of that smuggle ability and its recursion. So Enterprising Lackey is great. Now, I'm going to be playing Energy Conversion Lab in the version I'm going to show you primarily because of how good Enterprising Lackeys is with that card. But we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about like Energy Conversion Lab versus 30 health because it's definitely a consideration. There's also one more thing about Enterprising Lackey, but we'll get to that a little later. All right, so here's the list. You'll see the sideboard in a separate image a little later. So this is Palpatine Green with Energy Conversion Lab. Going to go kind of break down all the cards. So I do play 3 Salacious Crumbs here. For 1 cost, it lets you cycle with Palpatine's ability, which is nice if you need that card draw. You get some incidental healing, which is really nice, especially when paired with Yularen, where each time you play it, it's actually going to give you 2 health. The ping, you know, that it does is not incredibly useful, other than the fact that it puts it back in its hand so that you can play it again and gain another life. But mostly it's there for that incidental life gain, and the cycling gives you cheap plays so that you can churn some actions. We'll talk about the rest of the 2s now. So we got 2 Piets and 3 Laurens and 2 Scanning Officers. Those are the 7 officials we're going to be playing to help turn on our Emperor's Royal Guard. 3 Lauren because, again, the healing is very important in this deck, so I value that a little more than like Scanning Officer's ability. But Scanning Officer does have a nice one that can definitely get some decks. If you expect people to be playing Smuggle, it can definitely crush a turn for you if you end up exhausting someone's resources because you blew up their Smuggle card before they were able to play anything with it. So it's important when you're using Scanning Officer to target resources that haven't been spent yet to see if you might spike something that has Smuggle. Conversely, if you're playing against Scanning Officer, you should definitely always use up the resources that have Smuggle cards so that you don't get blown out by the officer. Also got 2 Piets, who's not very good at brawling in the early game, but he is safe from the 3 power units that aggressive decks might play on the ground, which makes it more easy to stick that Emperor's Royal Guard the next turn, which is really nice. But he's also mostly here because of how good he is with Reinforcement Walker. So that is an absolute tremendous synergy to be able to gain 6 life, potentially with the Reinforcement Walker coming into play and attacking at the same time. And that's a lot of the time how you're going to end up stabilizing into aggressive decks. It is an important synergy, and we're adding 2 Timely Interventions here because of how much we like ambushing with Reinforcement Walker. Timely Intervention also has the upside, of giving your Consortium Star Vipers an extra ambush. That's 4 cost play, but that could be quite vital. So Timely Intervention has been great. The main synergy is Reinforcement Walker, but it has some other synergies. We get the Energy Conversion Lab as our first free ambush, but then we get a few more to trigger throughout the game. Don't resource them too quickly, right? Like, there's a big difference between playing it for 1 and playing it for 2 from your resource row. That could mean a whole turn, right? That's 9 cost with Reinforcement Walker as opposed to 10. If that 9 cost Reinforcement Walker is going to stabilize you with an ambush, that's more important than that card advantage that intervention gives you if you played it from the resource row. All right, so 3 Royal Guard, not much to say here. It's a 3/5 Sentinel a lot of the time, and that's kind of like our best turn 2 play against a lot of decks. So we play it. It's just a big guy. It comes out of Vader as well. Now, it doesn't have Sentinel when it comes out of Vader, but a lot of the time you can give it Sentinel like the turn after by flipping Palpatine and turning it on. 2 Consortium Star Vipers and 2 Black Sun Starfighters. These are space units that we need to kind of stem off early aggression. I'm going 2/2 here because I really rather have the Star Viper most of the time early, but Vader can pull out the Black Sun. So that's why I've kind of split it. I actually put the 3rd Star Viper in the sideboard, mostly to bring in against Sabine so that we have that as a turn 2 ambush play more frequently. Now we'll talk about the ramp. So it's 2 resupply, 3 super laser tech, 3 command. 8 pieces of ramp. I think that was enough. I was playing 9 with the resupply, the 3rd resupply for a lot of time. Now, the reason resupply is cut and not super laser tech is just because of how good super laser tech is with Palpatine's ability, specifically him being able to sacrifice that super laser tech to throw a damage, but very importantly also wound something so that your flip turn is turned on. It's one of the best things you can do sometimes is on your 6 resource turn, if you're able to double ramp that turn with a super laser tech and a resupply and get that damage on some unit and flip Palp, you can just absolutely steal games that way. So having more food for Palpatine is really important. Of course, super laser tech is also just one of the best cards in the game. We're not cutting that. I think you can consider playing the 3rd resupply here, but I think 8 pieces of ramp has felt fine. Command, I think I talked enough about all the modes. It's good in grinding, ramp, incidental removal, right? And the buffs are nice. I'm playing 2 Strike Trues because of how light this deck is on actual removal. I think Strike True actually works decently well in this deck. We do tend to have enough beef on our units that it is live as a removal. And a couple pieces there, especially to go across arena. We can usually completely gum up the ground eventually, especially after we can start hitting our Vaders and Mauls and Walkers, but we can often get kind of got in space, and Strike True allows our ground units to punch into space, and it's been better than I thought it would be in testing. Enterprising Lackey, also talked about this guy. He's great. He's our best energy conversion lab target. Of course, energy conversion lab, we use that with our Star Vipers and our Black Suns to hit space units. In a pinch, you can do it with Super Laser Tech. It's actually better with Super Laser Tech in this deck than most decks because of that wounding ability. So even if you're not killing something with the tech, having an opponent have a wounded unit is always a good thing. It's something we want to consider throughout the game. Overwhelm Barrage, it's a really important card in this deck, more so probably than some of the other versions. This deck actually has access to like an early good target for Overwhelm Barrage in the Enterprising Lackeys, something a lot of Palpatine decks don't have. They usually just have like 3 power units until like much later in the game. So having a bigger unit like the Lackeys gives you more use for Overwhelming Barrage, and it is just like going to be a big stabilizer on that Palp flip turn as well, because you can steal something and then like kind of barrage the rest of the board, and then Palp can attack and throw another unit at something, right? So you can get a ton of damage into play in one turn with that overwhelming barrage on that Palp turn, and that can help clean up the board. 2 Palpatine's Returns. I love this card in general. I think this is like, I've called it the S tier of sideboard cards, but here we've got it in the main deck. And the reason it's in the main deck is, first of all, we don't have as much options for top end, right? Like blue would have Avengers and Snokes also, right? Red would have like Palpatines, potentially Crate Dragons. Even yellow could have something like Change of Heart as like another version for a top end. But Palpatine's Return, right? We've got our big force units. So of course there's synergy with that card when people make you discard stuff early and you can just like cheat out a Vader or Maul. But yeah, it's just like redundancy for all our big stuff like reinforcement walkers. But there's also a really nice synergy with Enterprise and Lackeys. We'll talk about that a little later. Vader and Maul as well. We're playing 3 Vaders, 2 Mauls. I could see 3 Mauls, 2 Vaders. I think mostly I prefer just being able to bring a friend with the Vader because it gives more food for Palpatine. Like, I really like using Palpatine's ability as much as possible, even if it means tossing like actual units, like your Star Vipers or Black Suns. Like churning cards, and getting more through your deck is really valuable. Vader is nice that he can help stabilize. If you have another official in play, that Emperor's Royal Guard is on. If he can bring a Piet, it makes your opponent's next turn really awkward because, like, well, do they have to kill this 1/4 or are you about to ambush a reinforcement walker? So Vader is great. Maul is fantastic too, especially because, he can one-shot things like Boba. And often you're going to be ramping past Boba in the first couple turns, so you might even just be able to, like, Maul the turn Boba comes out or, like, the turn after. And that's really nice because this deck does not have something like Death Trooper that blue would have. So Vader's not able to do that 7 damage the way he could in a blue villain deck. 3 Reinforcement Walkers is awesome. Reinforcement Walker is like key here. Like, this is your stabilizer. The card's really good in general, but so good with ambush. And we've got Piets and timely interventions to help make that more consistent against non-aggro decks where you're not trying to like gain 3 or gain 6. He's also could draw you cards. So, right, that helps with your like card advantage situation. And we're going 1 Relentless, 1 Devastator in the main deck to really solidify that top end. With 2 Palpatine's Returns, all these cards that we just talked about are basically, we have extra copies of all of them. So even just having a 1 of these cards can be really good. Relentless, naturally, if we see an uptick in hard control decks, like a Boss Blue deck recently won a big event, more people are playing something like that, Relentless becomes better. Devastator is just like neutrally good. It's just like the kind of good card that'll be around. All right. So ECL and 30 health. So I talked a lot about what I liked about Energy Conversion Lab, but of course we have to talk about what you might want 30 health for. And this deck, it's a go long deck that really, really struggles with Sabine. Both of these versions, 25 and 30, are going to be heavily disadvantaged into Sabine if play skill is equal, right? Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. This deck is not good into Sabine. You can beat Sabines either by getting like running hot and like playing perfectly, and sometimes you'll get there. Or if you're a more seasoned player than your opponent playing Sabine and they maybe have a misstep, you are able to win these games. But a Sabine player piloted well is going to hurt you a lot, and the 30 health might give you a few percentages in that matchup, but I can't even guarantee that because of how impactful Energy Conversion Lab is with a couple of the cards we talked about, like the Star Vipers on turn 2 to like kill an A-Wing and heal 2, or the lackeys who are able to like one-shot a Sabine, or like one-shot whatever turn 2 play they made and then leave behind a unit that can then barrage their entire board, right? So I like Energy Conversion Lab. I understand the appeal of Command Center. I think more people lean to Command Center in this deck, and I'm not going to say they're wrong because I don't have like a strong enough opinion. I just like Energy Conversion Lab a lot. I think it gives you some more like more power plays are available, and but you're being a little more risky when you're doing it. ECL targets. I went through this a lot. Consortium Star Viper and Enterprising Lackeys are like the main ones, but of course you got Super Laser Tech, you got Black Sun, Emperor's Royal Guard can be a decent ambush sometimes. So you've got things to use it on, but really look to flip a board with Enterprising Lackey if you can. All right, so Palpatine's ability, I mentioned that I like using this as much as possible. I mentioned how good it is with Super Laser Tech. You got Salacious Crumb to churn actions, but in general, throwing units to draw cards is fine if you're not getting pressured so much that you absolutely need those units. The more you can go through your deck, the more you can curate your hand, the better your top end's going to be once you get there. Palpatine's ability is great at setting up his flip, which is really important. We want something damaged, and we want to think about that very early in a game because you don't want to end up in a situation where you have just like nothing to steal with Palpatine. Stealing even something small is great. Like that's a huge swing. You want something damaged early on in a turn so that you can, immediately flip, steal before it attacks you. So think about when to use these abilities, and sometimes you just want to keep something wounded for a really long time, even if it means it's going to hit you because you're going to set up that Palpatine's ability. So look for draws, look for situations where like you can math correctly with like over a Mirage or some ambush unit, right? Like think always, when can I capitalize on this ability as good as possible? It's better in some matchups than others, right? This is very slow into Sabine. It's like both this ability and his flip are very slow into Sabine. It's why that matchup is really, really bad. But there are situations where you can get something nice set up, especially if you can ping like a K2 and then flip steal it so that they don't get that 3 damage, right? So yeah, draw a bunch of cards. It's real fun. All right, his flip. So covered this a bit, but you want to think about this flip basically from like turn 3 on. Like you want to start thinking about options for what you're going to be doing, sequencing for like how to manage your resources in a way that you're able to make sure something is damaged on the turn that you are going to flip Palp, or know that you're going to be able to damage something that turn as well. There are units that are usually going to hit you before you can steal them, like a Fire Spray. It's very hard, for instance, to like steal a Fire Spray before it hits you, but maybe before it hits you twice, right? They play you end up in a situation where they're going to play a Fire Spray and you have something ready to toss at it so that you can do that and then immediately claim and steal that Fire Spray before they get a second attack. So that's pretty big, right? Other great things to steal, I mentioned K2, but things like Ruthless Raider, anything that's going to give guaranteed damage is great. And a lot of times after you steal something, you're going to end up throwing it at something that same turn, because now that Palpatine's attack can do 5. And our goal here with Palpatine's flip isn't to like steal a Crate Dragon and then win. The goal with the flip is to stabilize you so that then your top end can win. Very rarely am I relying on Palpatine to just like flip win the game. I'm relying on it to help me stop the bleeding, because he's so big that he's going to be able to help stabilize you. His on attack ability is actually very, very powerful, being able to do 4+1 on the same turn. You play a lot of cheap units, so you're able to like play them and throw them at things. You have things that create 2 units like Vader. So you have a lot of fodder a lot of the time. Him stealing something gives you fodder. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking to create a flip turn where you can stabilize, and then from there move on to your like real end game. Yeah, that's what I got for the flip. Oh, no, it's not. One more thing. So you're allowed to flip this without stealing something, and I think more people should start doing that. Don't put yourself in a position where you're just like praying that they're going to walk into something. There are situations where just like having a 4/10 is going to be very, very good for you to like kill things and then potentially draw you some cards on attack. So not that it's like goal number one to just like flip on 8 no matter what, but you have to look at options where like flipping him is fine. Like they don't have a wounded unit, you've got a barrage, you're like in that danger zone, you just flip, you barrage, you kill something else with his attack, and you like move on from there. You still have a massive leader deploy, so it's not the end of the world if you can't steal something. All right, timely intervention. So again, not much different here, but really look at setting up a reinforcement walker ambush if you can with that timely. Often it's going to be at 9 resources. Like if you're drawing those timelies really early, a lot of times you do want to resource them, although in some matchups, like you might want to just keep it to do a Consort and Star Viper ambush, especially against things that play like TIE Phantoms. Like the reason I'm playing 4 space units only that can interact with that, at least in the main board, but we got a lot of ambush, so those space units can go a long way to help against those TIE Phantoms and, you know, A-Wings and stuff like that. So timely intervention, don't resource it all the time. 1 is much less than 2 when it comes to taxing your own cards. All right, Palpatine's Return. I promised we'll talk about the synergy with Enterprising Lackey, so it's really cool. So, you know, you can Enterprising Lackey, when it dies, you can defeat one of your own resources and then put the Enterprising Lackey into play as a resource. So early in a game, you've got an Enterprising Lackey, Palp Return, and a Maul in your hand. You can resource that Maul. On turn 3, you can you can Enterprising Lackeys, for instance, ambush something, kill it. Then maybe the next turn, you trade it into something else, or their opponent removes it. Enterprising Lackeys into your resource row, Maul into your discard pile. Bam, you've created your own little mini discard rotation engine, and now you've got a Palp's Return for that Maul, and you can cheat it out on 6 resources. Same with Vader, right? This is really cool. Of course, it works with the non-force units as well, but primarily this, I'm trying to set up like a situation where I can cheat something with this. So that's really cool. Don't forget that Enterprising Lackeys does come into play exhausted as a resource, right? So even if the resource that was that you're trading off with was readied, it would be exhausted. So you want to spend your resources before you set that up, if possible. All right, weaknesses, damage-based removal. So that's a big issue for this deck, is that all the removal is damage-based. Over on Barrage, Strike True, Command, it's like Palp throwing units at things, it's your ambush units. So shields are a big problem for this deck. So you just gotta be aware of that, right? Like there's nothing to fix necessarily shields in general. It's a big issue in some matchups, but, you know, be aware of it. Find ways to maybe help pop shields, especially with Palpatine's ability, so that you can set up removal later. This is just something to consider. You don't have direct removal. Things with a lot of health can be a problem. Boba's armor can be a problem. We've got 3 confiscates in the sideboard. So that is just something I wanted to call out here. Okay, so we got the sideboard here. Talk about this a little quick. So confiscate, playing this for Darksabers and Boba's armor, basically. Darksaber in particular, because of how impactful a confiscate would be on the turn they play it and how cheap it is to squeeze into a curve. That's why we go for it. Boba's armor, I talked about how damage-based removal is kind of a weakness of this deck. It doesn't really have ways to like directly defeat things. It always has to do damage. So Boba's armor can be a big problem. Consort and Star Viper, playing the 3rd just for that Sabine matchup to get another good ambush target. 3rd Palpatine's Return also is here for the grindier games and the games that against like opponents that play Pillage, things like Han. 1 Assault Cruiser here. I like it as another one-shot kill for something like Fire Spray. You will often be ramping ahead of Boba, so even though this costs 8, if you've ramped once, you can get it the turn after they Fire Spray for 6. If you ramped twice, you could theoretically play it the same turn that they play a Fire Spray. You got 2 extra Relentless here for the control matchups, 1 extra Devastator also for the control and long grindy games. Also can play some of these extra ships into things like Han Blue or like Luke, stuff like that, like grindy mid-range decks, old Han Green. And one Endless Legion, because I think it's a fun card, and why not, basically. The key here to set up a 1-turn kill with it, I mean, or over 2 turns, ideally. But Relentless is really important for it to bring out so you don't get like super laser blasted immediately. Piet as well to come out so that everything you play immediately ambushes, so you can like ambush with a Reinforcement Walker and a Devastator and a Relentless and whatever. So like you just like delete your opponent's board, and then if they can't immediately defeat everything, which, you know, is still possible, they could play like throwaway event plus super laser blast. So of course you have to be aware of that one thing, like you don't, the super laser blast with the throwaway event. So maybe you don't play it until you've seen the first super laser blast get used on you, or the second one, right? Because often you can force a super laser blast with Palpatine with his flip. All right, matchups. We'll do, this one is just these 4. These are the 4 most popular decks. They've been the 4 most popular decks at the last few weeks in some major tournaments. So they're the 4 that we'll cover. So Mono Yellow Boba. This is an aggressive deck. We need to play defense. Best stuff we can do is just wall up with Sentinels, make it more awkward for them. Of course, we want to ramp so that we can create a flip turn to help stabilize us. Vader and Maul are very good if you can get them out early against Boba. Boba's armor is really the only thing that kind of like interferes with most of this. Enterprising Lackey ambush to kill things like Toro or Boba Fett, or even like a Bodhi, whatever it is that you need to kill. Like, you're able to get a big unit into play, turns on your barrages, it makes it more awkward for them. It's also 5 power, so it can't get cunninged. It's another thing to consider is cunning, of course. So like if you can play something like an Emperor's Royal Guard and then buff it with experience, with like command, like buff it and ramp, then they might be forced to do something like a waylay that turn. Of course, Cantina Bouncer can hurt you there. Like, Boba Fett's a very good deck. It has answers to a lot of stuff, but we can grind pretty well with them. We do have, other than 7th Fleet Defender, a decent amount of ways to interact with most of their units. We've got the ambushing space units if they're playing TIE Phantom, which you can remove fairly well with stuff like Star Viper. Once we can get past that flip turn, Boba's flip turn, and that mid-game hump where we hopefully ramped past them and we can start playing Vader's Mauls and Reinforcement Walkers, we should be able to stabilize. Sabine, awful matchup. Ideally, they go ground and you can go like official into Royal Guard, into maybe like a command to buff it, remove something potentially, set up a barrage in some way. You've got Enterprising Lackeys to ambush. So, of course, a lot of that doesn't work if Sabine's line was Darksaber, but if you were able to hold hostage the Darksaber by making it awkward for them to flip into you, you may be able to like ambush with an Enterprising Lackey the turn after to beat the Sabine. From there, we do need to rely a lot on Star Viper, incidental healing, Yularen, Salacious Crumb, anything that we can do to like get chip healing so that a big Reinforcement Walker can stabilize us. It's really tough. It is not a good matchup. You can win it sometimes. Just be ready. Han Blue. This one's cool because, like, you know, they self-damage their units, which is really awkward for them into a Palpatine later in the game. Like, they can't really do a Luke on 6 because you're just going to steal it. They can't do a lot of these power plays, like even in Obi-Wan, if you've ramped once or twice and you can steal an Obi-Wan, that's absolutely devastating for them. Their discard angle, although powerful, does not always line up very well into a Palpatine who can self-draw cards. What you do want to do is churn cards. You want to keep advantage. Like, I wouldn't just dump a bunch of really cheap units that don't trade well into their units. I would look at stabilizing with a good ambush, either in space if they started space, but ideally an Enterprising Lackey into something like a Kanan or a Cassian or a Yoda or a K2. It's a very huge swing. Once Han has to start using removal instead of deploying into you, you're going to be very far ahead. They have a lot of removal. They have a lot of late game grinding abilities with tech and stuff, but as long as you are able to keep your life in a not miserable place so that a crate dragon insta kills you, you should be good. Your top end is still better than theirs. You do grind better because you have more card draw and you have Palpatine's ability to basically lock them from playing one of their most powerful units. Like, you should be able to just, like, this deck is going to really struggle with Palpatine's flip. There's very little they can do to mitigate you taking one of their good units. Kira Green, this is more difficult than you might think, because the blue top end is a big problem for the blue villain top end, like Avenger specifically, is a pretty big problem for a deck like this that doesn't have good removal. You have Palpatine, right? So like, you are ideally using him to like kind of lock Kira from playing big threats, but they also have ways to just kind of reset because they get to play blue, so they get super laser blast. And if they ever stick a shielded Avenger against you with Kira's ability, it is very, very, very difficult to win those games. So I wouldn't look at her trying to aggro you as the correct thing to play against. Like, when I play Kira, I don't really try to aggro the Palpatine. The blue villain deck actually might want the game to go even longer than the Palpatine player, surprisingly, because, again, their top end actually just better than yours. Like, what you do to even that score is have the better leader. And that's for instance, why Palpatine blue, I think, would be much better into Kira blue, because you would be playing the similar top end. But the green, you are losing some of that oomph but you get to ramp, so you get to put more pressure on her theoretically if you can get Vaders and Mauls out quicker, force that Kira flip to not do a lot, not hold hostage any of your meaningful units, and you've got Palpatines and you've got commands. And in this version, Palpatine, absolutely tremendous, right? Like, if you're able to just play this game without using your Palpatine flip for a really long time to just like keep chaining big units, reinforce markers, drawing cards, you may make it difficult for them to actually like not have to use some of their bigger tools earlier, like Super Laser Blast. It's very unlikely they'll ever play an Avenger into you until you flip, but if you're able to like create a flip turn where you're able to like really push an advantage, do a ton of damage, then even if you get wiped afterwards with Super Laser Blast, you may be able to rebuild well enough with all the recursion that you have. Don't look at this matchup as like some buy. I think some discourse says like, oh, Palpatine just crushes Kira. I don't really think that's true. I think you definitely have the tools. Like, it's a fight. Like, it's a fun fight. It's a grindy fight, but the Mono Green version does have sometimes an issue with Avenger specifically. All right, Palpatine Green. So a few other considerations for this deck. There's plenty more. I just wanted to call out a few cards. So like Outline Tie Vanguard is a cool, nifty little card that gives you like an experience, and then you can throw the unit, so it like gives you value. I like it. I couldn't fit it in this version. Mercenary Gunship is it's another good space unit to play on like turn 1 to help against Sabine aggro. The Phase Troopers, we play Emperor's Royal Guard. It's mostly just better, but it's nice to have a Sentinel that you can pull out with Vader, and Emperor's Royal Guard often does not have Sentinel when you pull it out with Vader. Cobb Vanth, this would be for grinding. You could pair him with something like Patrolling V-Wing too. I don't think the targets in the deck that I currently presented are very good for Cobb, but if you did have like Outland Ties and for instance V-Wings, you might have like more decent pulls with the Cobb Vanth. Rook is another good energy conversion lab target if you wanted a few more, right? Because while we do have good targets, it might feel a little light sometimes, so he could be an option. Traitorous, no, I'll put it here because I see it in a lot of decks. I don't really like the card in general. I think it's way too slow into Sabines. Really, I think the only card you are like would play this for is the Phantoms, especially if they get like buffed by something. But I just don't think those decks are very popular. And overall, I don't think it's good into most decks. I think it's mostly just too slow. Choose Sides, on the other hand, I think is pretty cool. If you were going to play it, I think I probably would also like maybe you do go into that like Cobb Vanth, Patrolling V-Wing, Outland Tie, like more of this like action churny like fodder units, and Choose Sides could be pretty good into like Avenger decks, for instance. Like that would be a pretty sweet little thing to do. All right, that's what I got. I hope you enjoyed it. Palpatine's fun. Palpatine Green is, you get to ramp a lot, which is cool. You basically have no hands ever that you don't get to ramp with, and that's exciting. And the deck's in a pretty good spot. You just have to accept the really bad matchup into the Sabine. Sabine's popular, so that is sometimes a tough pill to swallow. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Check out the Patreon too. And until next time, take care.